I used to go to summer camp every summer back when I was younger. This was in the late 79s or so, maybe early to mid 80s. That was the peak of summer camp related horror movies, but I guess that's not really important. Except to let you know that we used to do those campfires and gather around to tell scary stories by them. This is also something that happened during my last time at this particular camp. There was a bit of a strange incident that occurred when I was there, and afterwards my parents didn't want me to ever go back. Now, I'm not going to say exactly where this happened. I will let you know that the camp is still there though. I just checked out of curiosity actually. I don't want to get into any legal issues or trouble with them or anything. I was 14 years old at the time this happened. There were several boy cabins and girl cabins. Generally, one of each would be paired up to do things together. So, one night, the girl cabin that we were paired up with were out sitting by the campfire and roasting marshmallows. One of the counselors, who was 17 years old if I remember correctly, decided to ask us if we had any scary stories to share around the fire. For the life of me, I can't remember that many details of the stories. I do recall that most of them were fairly lame, but I guess that was to have been expected. Plus, funnily enough, one or two of the campers even tried to rip off famous horror movies in their story. I didn't realize this at the time, but looking back, I think the reason he did this was actually because he knew the other kids would all tell really lame stories, so when it finally came around to tell his, it would seem extra terrifying. All I really remember about the story that the counselor told, though, is that it was a fairly typical campfire story. It just so happened to take place at this very camp many years ago. It involved a camper who was bullied by older kids, bullied so much he got fed up and lost his mind or whatever. After that, he killed so many so-and-so other campers and counselors before disappearing into the woods, never to be seen again. He was never caught and still lives out there waiting for campers to come so he can kill them once more. It was fairly standard trite stuff. While he was telling the story though, we began to hear some weird creepy noises away from the fire. Some of the younger kids were scared by the noises. The older ones like me though pretty much figured that it was another counselor trying to scare us. That was pretty typical of the way these campfire tales would go anyway. I could tell looking at the younger kids that several of them were really scared. I might have been mildly so, but I knew what was going on. So, the counselor, after getting to the end of the story, began noticing those sounds coming out from the woods. Turning back to us, he put on the cheesiest look and asked us if we heard the spooky noises. Of course, most of the younger kids told them they had. One of them even braved to ask if he thought it was the camper who had disappeared so many years ago. The counselor told the kid it was probably nothing, but he thought that he should go out into the woods to find out what was going on. One of the younger kids begged him not to go, thinking something bad would be waiting out there for him, but he assured her that he would be all right. He told me I was in charge until he got back. Then he got up and crept off into the woods. Now, I hadn't been told anything about a prank. I thought if he had left me in charge, he might have at least let me in on the joke, but I had to brace myself for whatever was going to happen anyway. I tried to pay attention to the noises out in the woods, but a lot of the younger kids started to get worried and kept asking me questions about if that counselor was all right. They even asked me when he would be coming back. Because I was paying so much attention to them, I really couldn't tell where he might have gone. I was worried that with my guard down, I was going to be just as scared as them when he actually came back. We waited, but there was nothing happening while we did so. There were no noises that seemed out of place, no people that we saw or heard out in the woods. But worst of all, we kept waiting, and the counselor did not come back. Now, I think just about everyone was beginning to get a bit scared. The younger kids thought the killer camper had gotten to him. I still thought we were being set up for an eventual scare. But regardless of what, everyone seemed to be a bit apprehensive of something. Well, even more time passed by, and I could no longer justify waiting there. I began to get worried as well. I sent one of the 13-year-old campers over to one of the cabins to get another counselor. They came back with Steve, who was 18 and a typical big jock. He was actually the person I had foremost assumed might have been helping our counselor with his little prank. I decided to explain to Steve what had happened. Turned out he was not aware of anyone pranking us, so he got worried too. He went and got another counselor and grabbed some flashlights for all of us. They had me stay with the kids from my group while they went out and searched for our counselor. I took the kids all back to their cabins and told them to lock the doors up tight. I was going to go back to the fire and wait to see when the guys got back. Luckily, the girls' counselor was still in her cabin, so she was there to watch the girls. The boys, though, really didn't want me to leave. They seemed a lot more scared than the girls were actually. I don't know exactly how much time had passed. I didn't have a watch, but I knew it had been quite a long time since our counselor had gone out there. I even heard Steve and the other counselor calling out for him quite loudly. And then I started to feel really scared. Now, after a while, I began seeing lights headed in my direction. I was relieved. I immediately thought that Steve and the other counselor must have found the guy. When only the two of them emerged from the woods, though, I felt a sort of weird jolt in my system. They hadn't found him. I went with them to the camp director. He had already gone to bed, but we let him know about the emergency situation going on. He got in touch with the park rangers as I went back to the cabin to tell the boys to try and get some sleep. In the end, my counselor never came back that night. The rangers searched all over for him. Adults came and formed search parties to look for him. Many people came and searched for him in those vast woods, but no one ever found him. I don't know what happened. The official story was that he was a runaway. Apparently, he didn't have the happiest home life and did have some abuse issues with his parents. Of course, though, that's not what most campers believed. Not myself, but it seemed they believed that the camper who had disappeared into the woods so long ago came back, heard the counselor telling his story, and killed him, then hid the body somewhere that could never be found. I don't quite believe that, but I do wish I could just know what happened to him. One time when I was at summer camp, I had a really terrifying experience. I was 13 years old at the time, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure how long we had been at camp at this point, but it was a month-long trip. I'm going to guess it was sometime near the middle of it. The cabin that I stayed in was off to the far side of the camp. Right about 50 feet away from there was this fire pit. On some nights, we would roast hot dogs or marshmallows or something by the fire. People would gather around and tell scary stories, but we weren't really allowed to tell anything too scary because some campers were too easily scared. When we went to bed that night, we had just come in from sitting at the campfire. Our counselor did not sleep in the cabin with us. There was a separate cabin for both the male and female counselors. He waited until everyone was lying down in bed, and at least pretending to be asleep before he left. I assumed he was walking to the counselor's cabin. I couldn't sleep though, mostly because some of the other boys weren't sleeping and they were talking to or whispering with each other. I think most of us had drifted off before I did though. There was a top bunk with a window that was looking out over towards the fire. I laid there, not able to sleep, just watching the fire burn. After a little while of staring, I was very surprised to see someone walk up from what looked like the river. I watched as he walked right up to the fire and then sat down beside it. At first, I assumed it was one of the counselors, but it made no sense for them to be coming from that direction. Still, I didn't think anything too unusual was going on yet. After another little while, though, I saw another person walk up to the fire. This person was coming from the camp. They walked up to the fire, but they didn't sit down. I was wondering exactly what was going on there. It didn't take long until I watched the first guy immediately leap onto his feet. He approached the second man, and I watched the second guy back off a little. It only took a moment or two before I noticed a struggle break out amongst the two men. It was not easy to make them out at all, just shadows up against the fire, but they were definitely fighting. I had no idea what to do or even if I should do anything, but then I heard one of the guys calling out the specific name of one of the counselors. It was only a few moments before a couple other people ran into the picture. It was a very obvious struggle. I don't know exactly why I did this, but I jumped off my bunk and ran outside immediately. There were at least 3 other counselors over there. I doubt they desperately needed my help or anything, but I had watched the whole thing unfold and wanted to see it closer at hand. Well, just when I got close enough to make the people out, the worst happened. The man who had been sitting by the fire pulled out a knife, and I watched as he stabbed one of the 3 counselors. I stopped in my tracks, wasting no time turning around, and ran back to the counselor's cabin. There were some other counselors in there. I told them that a person had just been stabbed by someone down at the fire. They told me to remain still in the cabin as they went down there to check it out. I did. I was too terrified to go back out a second time. I just waited and waited, scared to death about what was going on. Finally, after what seemed like forever, a few of the counselors came back to the cabin. They had come with a police officer as well. Thankfully, we weren't that far from civilization where it wouldn't have made any sense that they could get there so quickly. I had to talk to the officer and tell him exactly what I had seen. They asked if I could describe anything about the man who had done the stabbing, but unfortunately, I had never really gotten a good look at him. Apparently, some hermit had been camping out in a canoe or something. He was the one who had come up to the fire. I guess the counselor had gone out to see what was going on, and the hermit just attacked him. After the stabbing, the hermit had gotten back into his canoe and fled while the counselors tried to help the wounded one. It was really scary, especially thinking about how this dangerous hermit was still being at large. I actually wondered if they would close down the camp because of it. You know, like people suggest all the time in horror movies, but no one ever listens. Nothing like that happened, though. No one figured the guy was any real sort of danger, because it was unlikely he would come back to the camp for fear of being caught. We finished up the last couple weeks of camp with no further incident. I'm not sure if that hermit was ever caught. If he was, we were never told about it. It sure added to the scary atmosphere of the camp being out by the fire, though. Nothing happened, though, for the rest of the time, and when camp was over, we all just went home. I guess that's how these sorts of things end in real life. I had been going to summer camp every year for as far back as I can remember. When I was 16, I stopped being just a camper, though, and became a counselor myself. It was pretty cool to not only be responsible for a bunch of kids, but also being able to bend the rules a whole lot easier, too. When I was 18, right after graduating high school, I went to what I assumed would be my very last time at that camp. I was going off to college in the fall, and I just thought that meant that this part of my life would be far behind me. I knew most of the other counselors, as they had been going to the camp for just as long as I had been. Plenty of them were going off to college too. So, we tried to have as much a fun time that summer as we could, seeing as how it might be the last time we could do it together. One night, about a week into camp, we had done a hot dog roast by the campfire. After putting all of the younger kids to bed, all of the counselors went back to the fire to hang out. One of the guys had gotten us some beer, so we kept by the fire drinking and talking, and telling each other scary stories as well. Of course, back then, it didn't take very much beer to get us buzzed. We were all 18 years old after all. After hanging out by the fire sometime after midnight, a bunch of us decided to go skinny dipping in the lake. It was a very dumb idea, I know, but when you're young and buzzed out like that, you tend to make some stupid decisions. Of course, horny 18-year-olds tend to like going skinny dipping as well. So we all went down to a certain part of the lake. We wanted to make sure we were far enough away from the camp that if any of the kids got up, they wouldn't come upon a bunch of naked 18-year-olds in the water. I was super out of it at the time. Everything I'm going to share will be seen through the lens of a very drunk person. We were all playing around, just having a nice time. There was this rock that wasn't too high, but it overlooked the water. We took turns jumping off of it into the water. Now, on about the 3rd time I jumped off the rock, the strangest thing happened. I jumped off and went down deep into the water. However, on the way up, I felt 2 things immediately. Something seemed like it had just grabbed my leg, and suddenly I stopped going upward. I looked down into the water, but that was pretty pointless. Even with my eyes a little bit adjusted, I couldn't see anything in that dark water. but although I couldn't see what was holding my leg, it was very clearly something keeping me from resurfacing. It only took mere moments before I began to struggle and panic a lot. I kept flailing my arms, kicking my legs as best as I could. When I jumped, I hadn't intended on being underwater for so long, so I didn't have any breath saved up either. Holding my breath was becoming impossible, and I accidentally sucked some water in when I couldn't hold it back anymore. At first, it felt really painful. I began struggling more and took in more water, but I couldn't get loose from whatever was holding my leg. After an extremely long moment of terror, everything blacked out. I woke up very confused on the side of the lake. I was spitting out water, but unsure what was happening around me. After that, I remained on the ground, looking over at everyone as I was trying to figure out what had just happened. When I started getting my faculties back, I realized that I must have just drowned. Apparently, the other counselors were very concerned when I didn't resurface. They all came and pulled me out of the water. They were very confused, though, about why I hadn't come back up. I remembered something had grabbed my leg. I told them all about it, but they seemed really doubtful. They told me nothing was holding me down when they'd pulled me out of the lake. They thought I must have imagined all of it when I inhaled the water and started hallucinating. But I know that I didn't. Something grabbed me under the water. I have no idea what it was, but I remember it very clearly. I'm a great diver and swimmer, so there's no reason I would have just not resurfaced unless something was holding me down there. To this day, people don't believe me when I tell this story, but I just want to reiterate, it really did happen. I never went swimming in that lake again, and in the end, I never found out what it was that grabbed me. A few years ago, I worked at a Jewish summer camp in North Georgia. As many of you might know, Georgia is a fairly conservative state, as well as being predominantly Christian. There are some small Jewish communities and a few summer camps as well. I'd say this camp was more culturally Jewish than it was religious. There were no religious requirements nor any religion-specific focus. Rather, it was just a place for kids who were often in the minority to come to a camp that allowed them to meet other kids just like them. The staff came from all over as well. We had many Australians, lots of Brits, a few Israelis, and many people from various areas of the USA. Each night at around 10, most of the staff was able to go out on the town for a couple of hours. Enough staff remained behind to watch over the cabins though. We rotated every now and then. This particular night, a group of about 5 of us decided to go to a local bar to grab a few beers. It had been a really hot day and it was also a humid night, so we decided to sit outside on the patio. For some backstory in the town, generally we were extremely well received by the community, despite some differences. We brought in a lot of revenue for the town during the summer actually. We bought supplies at the local Walmart and often took the campers on tubing trips or occasionally out to dinner after a long hike on the Appalachian Trail. It was midsummer, so we had been out to the bars in the area many times already that session. The 5 of us all sat around a table, drinking and happily discussing the events of the day, as fellow employees typically would after work. About 30 minutes in though, this white man in his 20s walks right up to our table. I distinctly remember a jagged scar on his cheek, but I didn't think much of it at the time. He introduced himself and told us he was having a party that night at his place. Anyone can come, he said. Black, white, gay, straight. I found it odd that he'd open his speech with that sort of disclaimer. Of course a party should be open to everyone. Why did he feel a need to specify? But we'd all had a few beers and were feeling pretty loose. We talked in a friendly manner for a bit longer and nothing seemed too off. We told him we were working at a camp in the area and couldn't stay out late, so we'd need to be heading back soon. An hour later, our group went out to the parking lot to get into the car. As we approached it, we saw the same man emerge from the shadows. He had a buddy with him with a shaved head, and his expression was incredibly hateful. His eyes had changed completely. He pounded his fist into his hand, then took off his shirt and revealed a poorly inked SS tattoo. My stomach dropped. One of the bigger guys in the group, Kevin, immediately reacted by pulling a knife out of his back pocket and asked what they wanted. The original guy started shouting some anti-Semitic remarks and told us he was going to beat us all down. Kevin started walking toward the two men, but we pulled him back just in time. He'd told his buddies we were on the way. Sure enough, some more guys started walking into the parking lot from every direction. It kinda gets all blurry here. I remember jumping into one of the cars and pulling Kevin with us. It felt like we were completely surrounded, though in reality there were probably only 7 or 8 people there. They threw rocks and all sorts of things at our car as we sped off. My heart was beating like crazy. We never went back to that bar either. On the bright side, when we told the story to the competitor bar in town, the bartender lined up 6 shots, cheersed us, and said we'd always be welcome there. Had no more problems in the town itself. But when I took some campers on a 2-day hike up the Appalachian Trail, that was a scary story for another time. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any comments or feedback on what I could do better, or you just want to talk about the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments down below. I try to read every comment that comes, and I really enjoy hearing your guys' thoughts. Before anything else, I would like to give a special thanks to my friend Killer Orange Cat who allowed me to use these stories today. You can find a link to his channel in the description below, as well as a link to the Reddit post where these stories are found. He does some great work, so if you like these stories, be sure to check him out as he has lots of ones that nobody has ever read before. If you guys want to contact me for any reason, or you would like to send a story in with a submission, please be sure to check in the description below the video. You'll find links to all of my social media, including my Gmail, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. Send me a message on any of those and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story submission, please be sure to include what the type of story it is if it has one, the name of the story, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, please be sure to format it properly and use proper grammar so it's easier to read if I actually use it in a submission for a video. Also, be sure to include as much detail as you are possibly comfortable with sharing. Overall, guys, I think that's pretty much about it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.